Zhang Weili is the current UFC Women's Strawweight champion, and for a very good reason. Weili is perhaps the closest thing we have to a Terminator in the UFC.
Zhang Weili makes history!
She is not only the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC, but she also holds the greatest strike differential in a UFC fight. Here are 10 insane facts about this real-life Terminator. Number 1. She started fighting through Kung Fu. All fighters start from somewhere. Weili started with Kung Fu. For context, Zhang Weili is Chinese and was born in Hebei, a province in the north of China. Weili would watch old Kung Fu and karate movies when she was growing up and was inspired to begin fighting from these movies. In an interview, Weili said that everyone she knew practiced Kung Fu, and this rubbed off on her. Weili claims that on her very first day of Kung Fu training, she actually asked her trainer if she could learn to fly like she saw in old movies. From Kung Fu, she began to train MMA and became the legend she is today. Number 2. Tony Ferguson is her favorite fighter. Zhang Weili has gone on record to say that her favorite fighter with the UFC is none other than Tony Ferguson. Specifically, she enjoys Ferguson's unique style. Ferguson uses Wing Chun in his fighting. Wing Chun is a traditional Chinese martial art, related to the Kung Fu that Weili first used. There is a debate amongst MMA fans about whether or not more traditional styles like Wing Chun work in the cage. Some say such styles have been disproven, while others would disagree. Weili and Ferguson would clearly disagree. Ferguson was actually able to use Wing Chun techniques like wrist grappling to win his fights. Number 3. Ronda Rousey was her inspiration to get into MMA. However, although Tony Ferguson is her favorite fighter within the UFC, he wasn't her inspiration to get into MMA. According to Weili, Ronda Rousey was actually her inspiration to get into MMA and fighting in general. In traditional Chinese culture, according to Weili, women are seen as weak. When she saw Ronda Rousey fighting professionally though, it inspired her to prove that women can be just as strong as men and be as good of fighters as men. Weili has definitely proved that. Number 4. She has fought plenty of men in training. Reinforcing the idea that women can fight just as well as men, Weili has plenty of experience fighting against and training against men. Weili trained in several different martial arts before becoming a UFC fighter. Specifically, when Weili was only 12 years old, her parents sent her to a martial arts school in China to train both Sanda and Shuai Jiao. Sanda is a form of kickboxing, and Shuai Jiao is a form of grappling. At the martial arts school, Weili would train against grown men. However, what makes this especially interesting is that men were punished if they held back at all against women. As such, Weili was training and fighting fully grown men who didn't show any restraint. All of this certainly contributed to her being a real-life Terminator. Number 5. But the intense training came at a price. Weili has been an incredible fighter from the very beginning, even though she trained against much bigger and stronger opponents and would go on to win multiple Sanda championships in her province. Weili had to retire early. During her training, Weili received an unspecified back injury that would chronically flare up. Since the injury kept recurring, she sadly had to retire to keep her health intact. From here, Weili would take on various odd jobs before she would begin training MMA at the Black Tiger Fight Club. Number 6. Her first UFC fight was fought alone.
Wow, heavy shots. To fight like this. Wow! This is not
Zhang
good.
Weili has her down!
Zhang Weili made her UFC debut at UFC 227 and fought against Jessica Aguilar. Although Weili won the fight in the first round by submission, it wasn't an easy win. Weili was completely alone during the fight. Weili had to get a visa to travel to the US to make the fight, which was held in Los Angeles. Although Weili was able to get her visa to come fight, her trainer wasn't as fortunate. Weili didn't have anyone in her corner and went into the fight completely alone. It's been said that fighting is the loneliest sport in the world, and Weili certainly experienced that loneliness firsthand. Number 7. Weili is the first Chinese champion in UFC history. Weili is notable for a lot of things, but something that is very notable about her is her place in UFC history. She's the first Chinese champion in the UFC. The UFC, historically, didn't have a lot of presence in China, and MMA in general has had a rough history in China. The Chinese government has discriminated against MMA fighters and MMA in favor of traditional Chinese martial arts to promote national heritage and pride. Despite this, the UFC was anxious to create a presence for themselves within China. Weili was given a title shot at UFC Fight Night 157, which was Weili's fourth fight in the UFC. The fight was actually held within China as well. Weili won the fight and became the Strawweight champion by knocking out her opponent Jessica Andrade at the very start of the first round. Number 8. She was a champion in other fighting organizations before the UFC.
Like cage. I mean,
Like a lot of other UFC fighters, Weili fought in other organizations before having her chance to become a fighter within the UFC. Before the UFC, Weili was the women's strawweight champion in Kunlun Fight and the Top Fighting Championship. Weili would win the title in Kunlun Fight at the Kunlun Fight MMA 11 card, which was her 11th fight. Weili won the fight by technical knockout against Simone Duarte in the first round. A mere 2 months after becoming the Kunlun Fight champion, Weili would then win the Top Fighting Strawweight Championship. Interestingly, Weili has also never lost either of her 2 prior belts, making her a triple champion. Number 9. Only 3 of Weili's fights have been in the USA.
back fist to the neck, jaw, ear.
Weili has been in 27 total fights. Yet, out of those 27 fights, only 3 of them have actually been in the United States of America. The vast majority of her fights, instead, have been in Asia. Some places Weili has fought include China, Japan, Korea, and Thailand. Number 10. She is a huge MCU nerd.
She's quick, she's strong, she's fast. Probably can also overwhelm you with just being a steady presence.
An interesting fact you may not know about Zhang Weili revolves around what she does outside of the ring. Weili actually prides herself on cooking, considering herself a great chef, but she is also a huge nerd when it comes to Marvel. Specifically, Weili's favorite superhero is actually Spider-Man.